That's depressing. Do you know we're supposed to be in winter? And you guys are in this city that doesn't know what winter feels like. And I ask you how you are, and you say, I'm all right. How's everybody doing? I mean, it doesn't sound great, but. So I'm Pearl. I'm a board member at the NYDA. If I speak too fast for all the various translators, please let me know. Personally, I'm very excited to be urban, truly the best city South Africa has to offer. If anyone disagrees, they're lying. Just don't believe them. You really got blessed because whilst everyone in Johannesburg is shivering in what's supposed to be winter, you all get to be here in summer clothes. So you're welcome. We are going to get into our panel. We've been given 2 hours, but I would like us to actually stop at 6 like we were supposed to, just because I would like to go visit my mom. No, I mean, it's really important to keep time. So, what we want to do in this panel today is talk about what socioeconomic recovery looks like post COVID. Um, and I think for all of us who work, we have a really nice diversity of industries here today. I think we can all tell lots of horror stories about what COVID meant for the work that we do, right? For example, I run a youth development organization. It's not the NYDA. And one of our biggest challenges was that all of our work is situated in township and rural communities. And so when lockdown happened and we weren't allowed to go outside, we had to figure out how to take community development projects and deliver them in rural areas, but do that online. And it was one of the trickiest things to do. We figured it out because we're really good at our jobs. But just managing that transition, right? And thinking about if you do have this kind of life-changing event that's happening, how do you adapt your work, right? Are you building systems and ways of working that are adaptable, right? How are you excluding and including people in the ways that you adapt your work? And what does that mean for the world right now, right? I think one of the things COVID has maybe taught us is that anytime is go time, right? Anything can happen at any point in time. I think when the pandemic started, I don't think any of us thought that it would be at the scale that it was, right? We spent 3 years indoors. And I think we're still kind of reeling from those effects. And I'm really glad that we're in a space right now where we can talk about what does a post-COVID world look like, and how do we begin to kind of pick up the pieces of our economies and our communities, um, given what happens when you have a pandemic at such a scale. So we have a really exciting panel. Before I call them up, I want to call up our BRICS comrades, um, to kind of set the scene for what socioeconomic recovery for young people looks like in their home countries. And what I would like us to do in this conversation, because I know you hear panel and you think that you're going to have the afternoon off. You're just going to sit and listen to the speakers, and maybe 3 people will ask questions. That's not going to happen. We're going to have a conversation, all of us together. And what I would like from this conversation is for us to remember that even though we sit here and when we come to gatherings like this, we come here as our job titles, right? So I'm here as NYDA, whoever is here as whoever, right? I want us to change that thinking for this panel. I mean, ideally, we would change that thinking for the rest of these few days. But I want us to sit here not as our job titles. I want us to be in this conversation as our community, right? And the young people that we interact with and interface with, and the communities that they come from. So, in all of the conversations we're having, and the questions we ask, and the comments we make, I would like those comments to come from a place of community, right? How do young people respond to the challenges that we're going to be talking about? what do solutions look like for the communities that young people come from? So I think we're very used to very high level conversations about policy and laws and all of these big systems that we need to put in place. But I would like this conversation to be grounded in the idea that when all of these policies are said and done, it's young people in communities that have to actually interface with them at an everyday level. And that's the lens that I want us to apply to this conversation. Are we all good with that? I would, this is kind of a democratic space. If you're not okay with it, you can tell me and I'll just ignore you for the rest of the time. So I want to start with our colleague from Russia who was very particular about how to pronounce her name. So Ms. Anastasia, she's going to chat to us about the experience of Russian young people post-COVID. She even did a presentation for us. So let's give her a round of applause for being super prepared.
Presentation, please. That's not mine.
So I think that's the wrong presentation. What's the So I think there should be a second. This is sabotage, I feel like. Have you made enemies in this room?
Not yet.
Not yet. She's about to fight someone.
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is an honor for me to be a part of the summit and acting as a speaker. So, we hope that today's dialogue will be fruitful. And today, I would like to concentrate on sustainable development goals and offer three initiatives. The first initiative, which I would like to start with, is about ninth goal industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies. At present, the qualitative socio-economic development of states depends on how quickly it managed to introduce these technologies into its economy. In this regard, we consider it is important to introduce a system of financing the best startups of young specialists from the BRICS countries in the field of new technologies through the BRICS New Development Bank. It is assumed that this process will take place annually and on a competitive basis. The introduction of such a practice will contribute to the accelerated socio-economic development of the BRICS countries. Second initiative is about the eight decent work and economic growth. Migration issues and ensuring the quality of the inhabitants of the citizens is a common important issue for all BRICS member countries. Sending countries are unable to provide workers with decent employment opportunities. The standards of living and wages in such countries are quite low, while the unemployment rate is high. So demand for low-skilled and low-paid jobs is constantly growing in the recipient countries. In order to prevent negative migration, we would like to offer to conduct a survey among the youth of the BRICS countries at the age of 16 and up to 35 years old. The main questions are what influences migrations, the social components of the choice of place of residence and work, and the fares. It is proposed to form the data into the study and make a cut for each country, age group, and segment. And the last but not least, And the last but not least is Goal 13, climate action. Today in the morning, that was highlighted many times how climate is important for all our countries. Global warming is one of the main problems nowadays, and youth play significant role in it. The climate is the agenda of the future, which is why young people should be closely involved in it. Members of major delegations and politicians are on average over 45 years old. Of course, they are interested in what will happen in the future, but they will not be able to show a real result in 30 years. What cannot be said about youth? We are the ones who can start making our way now and give real results in 15, 20, and even 30 years, because we will be a little bit than 50 years old. Young people are distinguished by their fresh views in their approach. We have not yet blurred our eyes and we do not know how to act correctly. We will try again and again, make some mistakes, but only these mistakes will launch this progress. We should form a common vision of the climate threat and a unified approach to how global transition to low carbon development should be carried out. Together, we can share best practices and ideas and complement each other. And already today, Russia takes an example from its colleagues, the BRICS countries. Brazil is a benchmark for us in terms of forest projects. India strikes with its pace of decarbonization in agriculture. We are learning from China how to create carbon markets, and South Africa gives us an example of renewable energy. One of the clearest examples where the committee can start is the development of ideas for methodologies for climate projects. Nowadays, Russia and other countries have faced the problem of creation their own methodologies and standards. Climate projects should be validated according to the foreign standards, which is often difficult to comply with. The BRICS countries need to unite on this issue and jointly develop standards and methodologies for climate projects as well. This will directly impact the ability to monetize the carbon units and accelerate the transition to carbon neutrality. So that's why we really would like you to support the idea to establish the youth committee, and together we will cope with even the most difficult problems. So thank you very much for your attention.
One more round of applause. Thank you. What I really love is when I ask a speaker to please only take 5 minutes, and then I time them, and they take less than 5 minutes. So thank you very much for keeping to time. I'm going to call our next speaker on, but I wanted to just highlight, right, that I think what's very clear from the proposal set out by our Russian comrades is that number one, there's a need for more youth-centered research. The idea that we're creating new policies, new SDGs, new plans, but we're not creating new research, right? So when we create new policy, what is the research that that policy is based on? And so there's a big need for us to kind of update the perspectives of young people so that we can plan better. But also there's a need for actual meaningful youth inclusion, right? Um, I think we often see with young people, you know, you'll get one seat at a table and then they say, well, that's inclusivity. And it's really not. And so I think things like the BRICS Youth Council that we'd like to set up, the Climate Change Council you guys would like to set up, is a step in saying, number one, young people know what we want. We can take time to figure it out if we don't, but we still deserve to be able to make decisions for and by ourselves. I'm going to call up our next speaker, which is our delegate from China. And I really thought I was going to be very cool and get everybody's names right. But I think he had no faith in me because when I asked, he was like, just call me Mr. Wu. And so please let's have a round of applause for Mr. Wu. Thank you so much.
I try to make it in 5 minutes. Okay. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and representatives, and dear young delegates from BRICS country. Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Wu. It's writing Jean here, so you can call me Jean. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the Chinese young delegations at ninth BRICS Youth Summits and discuss the post-pandemic economic and social recovery, as well as the implementations on UN's Sustainable Development agendas for 2030 as entrepreneurs focusing on data analysis. So which is uh, almost every industry. So for me, I want to share my experience in this field and how it can contribute to substantial developments. In today's world, the information is overloads. Data has become a valuable resources and assets. By collecting, organizing, and analyzing data, we gain valuable information about society, economics, and the environments. This information is critical for making decisions and solving problems to promote substantial development. Our, our Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized the importance of the international cooperation and technological innovations in promoting economic recovery and substantial development in global development initiative and building a community with a shared future for mankind. By understanding economics and social conditions through data, we can identify key issues and develop appropriate policy. Data visualization transfer complex data into easy understandable formats for better decision making. By combining new technology and sustainable development goals, we can increase the value and efficiency of data. So giving new motivation power to economics and social recovery after the pandemic. So China has made important progress in reducing poverty and promoting education equity. So through policy of poverty and the education reform, we help millions of people escape poverty and improve education accessibility and quality. We are contributing to the UN poverty reduction and quality education goal. So in the environment protection, the sustainable urban development, China has taken proactive measures. We have strengthened air pollution control, clean energy, and focus on building economical civilization. So additional, we have developed green and sustainable cities to enhance environment quality. Chinese youth organizations have played significant role in promoting sustainable development. Young Chinese people actively participate in volunteer service, so contributing to the social welfare initiative and development. We are passionate about environment protection, sustainable consumption, and lifestyle choice. Our initiatives and actions contribute to achievement of sustainable development goals. As a, as a representative of BRICS youth, I urge four young delegates to actively contribute to sustainable development goals. Let's strengthen cooperation, share our experience, and explore innovation solutions. By, by advocating for sustainable lifestyle, environment protections, and responsible for resources, we need more professionals in sustainable development fields. We need talents. So through the education and awareness, we need to work together, put our efforts into action locally, and achieve UN sustainable goals with BRICS nations and globally. Through our efforts on communication, cooperation, we can make greater contribution to economics after the social recovery and sustainable goals in our nations and the world. Thanks again for South Africa to invite us to come. So thanks all. Thank you.
We're doing so well for time. Thanks once again. Let's hear it for Mr. Wu. I think what's been really cool so far is that everyone that has spoken has emphasized the importance of climate and the environment. And I think it's a really cool throw forward for us because tomorrow morning, our very first panel is going to be hosted by Ms. Moraisi, who's a member of the board. And it's about facilitating a just transition. And so I think it's really good that we're already thinking about climate change and how whatever development looks like needs to still be considerate of the environment. Our final kind of opening speaker before we go off to our panel is our Brazilian delegate. Oh, he is really great. Mr. Mateus Hector. So let's give him a round of applause as he comes up on stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a such pleasure to be here today, back in Durban, after 12 years away from here. I've lived here during my high school. I studied at GHS, and KwaZulu-Natal is a really special place to me and really symbolic for today. The Portuguese discovered here 3 years before Brazil, when they are going to the east, and KwaZulu-Natal was in the middle of the integration among the West and the East, and it's really good to see this place being that again. Well, Brazilian position about recovery after the pandemic and due the 2030 agenda is about four pillars. The first one is how the pandemic teaches us about international cooperation. International cooperation due to the pandemic showed that you have the opportunity when we work together to solve our hardest problems. For example, with Chinese help, we've developed together CoronaVac and Sinovac vaccine that was really important to start the vaccination in Brazil. So thank you very much to China delegation. The second the second pillar is economics. After pandemic, we are seeing the rise of inflation in all over the world. We need to be really tight with that because inflation is the worst tax for the poor. Uh, we need to be commitment with independence of our central banks, fiscal policy with a lot of responsibility, and include this agenda worldwide to work it together. Our third pillar is social. We saw in the pandemic what we used to call in Brazil the invisibles. The problem were already there. The problems were already there. But the pandemic made us to see that. We could see plenty of people, 10 people living in a small room in Brazil's favelas, and this made us to act now. We are really important to expand our social programs in Brazil with fiscal responsibility and bringing the urban agenda um, through the central point of it. São Paulo City Hall is nowadays making its biggest housing program in the history and making a lot of efforts to improve our urban agenda. We are doing the change of our master plan that includes the people living close to the transports and also improve permitting the private sector to produce more housing and for consequentially a reduction in the housing prices and make a more dense city and for consequence a more sustainable city. We have a lot of projects that are being done today, such as the PU, that's Plan of Urban Intervention, that we are together with the private sector doing a lot of projects in vulnerable areas, such as PU Arcoleste and PU Vila Leopoldina. Those both projects are being ruled by as Urbanismo, our company of urban development. Our fourth and the last point for this panel is about environment agenda. Brazil is totally committed with to be the first race to zero country in the world. In the second semester, our federal government is planning to set up a plan to make Brazil be the biggest hub in the world for green investment and green company. And I'm so happy to be here again. I'm so happy to see that we are living again this BRICS momentum, and I'm sure that with all together can establish a lot of partnerships among Brazil, Africa, Russia, China, and India. Thanks so much, everybody. Good afternoon.
Thank you. I think our stage crew can remove the podium. Thanks so much, Mateus. Welcome back home. I don't know how to feel about you saying that you went to DHS, but that's a conversation the Durban people will have with you afterwards. So I want us to move into our panel, if we could get the. And I'm going to introduce our panelists quickly. Everybody has a copy of everyone's bios, so I'm not going to read them out, but feel free to stalk all of our speakers on their social media and tell them all the fun facts you found out about them. The first person I want to call up is the Youth Strategy Officer at the SRHR Africa Trust, Mr. Levi Singh. Let's welcome him up to the stage. We're going to have to do better than that. Let's keep this energy. I know it's late. We're all in this together. The next panelist is the Chief Executive Officer of the Masisizane Fund, Mr. Ndumiso Zulu. Hectic. People are already trying to groove. It's Tuesday. Our next panelist is an independent agri-economics consultant, Mrs. Tlale Matseke. This is great. For every woo, we'll finish 1 minute earlier. You guys are scammers. And our final panelist is the Chief Executive Officer of the Food Bev Center, Ms. Maktula Selamolela. I take it back. I take it back. You guys are scamming me. Thanks, everybody. So this is our panel. The way this conversation is going to work is we've spoken through a few talking points earlier, and I want us to be as conversational as possible. So we're not going to do questions at the end. If you have questions or comments and you want to add to the conversation throughout the conversation, then please just raise your hands, and our crew, I hope, will get mics to you. Amazing. And also bear in mind that we also have had 3 speakers that have come up earlier. And so if you have questions and comments for them, then you can also feel free to ask them your questions as well. A few house rules. We do obviously have translation services, so please speak in any language you want. Please ensure that this conversation is the only conversation happening in this room. The gag of the acoustics of this room is that I can hear you all. And so when you're having conversations, I can hear you, and it's really annoying. So please try to keep them at a minimum. I promise we'll be done very quickly, and we can get to socializing. The other thing I would like is we're going to be speaking to our panelists about the work that they do and how it's located in the communities that they come from and do their work in. And I would like to hear from people in the room answers to the same questions as it relates to your community, right? I think this can be a space where we share with each other best practices, we share with each other our own experiences, so we can learn from each other, right? And we can see where the similarities are in the challenges that we're facing. We good? We're all on the same page? I hope the translators are translating my jokes also. I'm gonna check if the other side of the room is laughing. Okay, so I'm going to start with Levi because he so generously asked for somebody else to start first. Um, and what I want, so all of our panelists are going to answer these questions, right? Is first of all, as we moved through COVID, right, in the work that you do, and I think we have a really nice diversity of industries here today. What were some of the new challenges that came up through COVID for the work that you do? What have been some of the key learnings that you've gained in these last 3 years? And given all of that, what does success look like, right? So we often talk about when we talk about solutions, we talk about solutions as if they're a method, right? So we're saying this is my favorite example to use, don't laugh at me. But we're saying we're trying to bake a cake and we spend so much time talking about the ingredients and the methods and all of that, but we don't talk about what kind of cake we want, right? And so that's the question that I have for us today is if we're talking about what socioeconomic recovery looks like, what does that actually mean for you and for the work that you do? So we'll start with Levi and then we'll move down this way. And I'm going to ask you to take 5 minutes each. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Pearl, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Awesome. Thanks, Paul. So I work in the adolescent and youth health space across the Eastern Southern African region. We really work on the politics of health. I primarily specialize in sexual reproductive and health rights. That's my core area of focus. So let's start off with a bit of urgency. So this panel is framed around the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030 as we know it. We are 67 months away from the year 2030. So if you think 2030 is a long time away, just picture 67 months and a calendar ticking downwards. Last week was the high-level political forum at the UN, and we heard that with 67 months to go to 2030, only 12% of all SDGs are currently on track. 12%. But coming to your question on new challenges, Paul, I think the three that have emerged in the health space, and the adolescent and youth health space in particular, the weaponization of misinformation and disinformation. We saw this around COVID. Firstly, COVID vaccines, they might make you grow an additional arm or an additional thumb or an additional toe. And we saw this then fragment into other areas, so HIV testing and treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But I think fundamentally we have a communications issue when it comes to health communication and how we communicate to younger millennials and younger Gen Zs in particular, and the approaches around communication to this new generation. But the weaponization of communication, disinformation, misinformation really did come up as a new challenge. We also have seen a prioritization crisis when it comes to health resources. We're seeing governments across Africa and across much of the global south throw money at building expensive hospitals. When the WHO tells us that over 60% of essential healthcare services can be provided through primary healthcare. That's your clinic, that's whatever health facility is in your community. But why are member states prioritizing or ministries of health prioritizing hospitals? Because they generate massive profits for states and other combined sectors. So there's a prioritization crisis, especially when it comes to adolescent and youth health, which can be delivered within communities in proximity to young people. Then the last new challenge is the fiscal space crisis. So in 2020, we found out that 35 out of 55 African member states were spending more money on servicing external debt than they were on investments in their health and education systems combined. More money on debt than health and education combined. When we talk about adolescent and youth health, only 1.6% of all foreign direct assistance has gone towards investments in adolescent and youth health globally. Yet we've got the largest generation of adolescents and young people of 1.8 billion in any time in human history. So we're really staring down the barrel of how COVID-19 retro payments, including in South Africa, are chipping away at investments that could be made in those two vital areas of education and healthcare, and which reinforce each other's benefits. And I think we really do need to think around how do we stop that trend, because this is not the time for austerity budgeting. Now onto the more positive notes. You asked for some of the emerging learnings, and I think two major learnings and trends that are here to stay. Digital health interventions are the future. Yes, people talk about the digital divide. Yes, it exists. Is it shrinking? Yes, it is. I urge you all to read the latest SDG report. Digital penetration and mobile network expansion across the African continent has quadrupled since 2020. Data is becoming cheaper, mobile penetration and network access is expanding at astronomical levels. So when it comes to anything from contraceptives to mental health services, et cetera, digital health services are yet to stay. We've got to figure out the regulation needed to ensure that these services are delivered in ethical and pragmatic ways, but also ensure that young people are centered in many of these digital health interventions. Personally, at our organization, we run a digital health intervention called YouthWise. We run across 9 countries in East and Southern Africa. We reach 5.5 million people on a weekly basis with information, education, and knowledge, and linkage to services on the ground across 9 countries. And that's just the power of digital health innovations. The last major trend to stay in terms of learning are self-care interventions, and that's closely connected to digital health interventions. Young people want convenience sells when it comes to health. Young people don't have time to wait in clinics and in other hospital facilities to access health services. So ensuring everything from HIV meds to family planning and contraceptive services to mental health services, that those are embedded in self-care packages are really the future of health. And again, it comes down to convenience, but also privacy, confidentiality, and the convenience and affordability aspect that young people really want. You wanted us to talk about success? I'll end on that. Success. As I mentioned, we have the largest generation of adolescents and young people in human history. There's 1.8 billion of them globally. And it's really disconcerting that when you go into multilateral spaces and when you have engagements, even with communities, there's no clear understanding of what an adolescent is. And that's mainly because most of our laws say that if you are under the age of 18 in any country, you're considered to be a child, as per the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But we know that adolescence is a very dynamic and very exponential period in human development. The adolescent brain has only developed at the same rate, at the same pace, if not faster, when it was in infancy. So we really need to reconfigure social and cultural conversations around adolescence. It can't be the zero-sum game where adolescents are either being viewed through a policy or legislative lens as little adults or big children. We have to ensure that we are making laws and policies that recognize and affirm their agency, their autonomy, and their dignity. So in the next 67 months from now, I don't want to be having conversations at the UN trying to figure out what an adolescent is. I want us to crack this question, because if we crack this question, we can definitely start making more succinct political arguments around the need to invest in this largest cohort of adolescents and young people in human history. I hope that's useful.
That's perfect. Thank you. I think it's a really important question about adolescence, right? Because the way we understand youth is we talk about youth as a period of transition. And we talk about the different transitions that young people go through in their lives that signify your journey to youth. And you're right, we don't actually think about it as an adolescent term, right? So is adolescence a period of transition, a period of learning? What are the key learnings in your adolescence phase, and how do we then create programming to respond adequately to that? I think a question for the room that you can think about and tell us when you're ready is this question about the digital divide and digital health services, right? I know in South Africa, there are a few companies right now working on apps where you can access medical professionals from home. So you can have a consultation with a doctor through this app. You can get your prescriptions renewed through this app without needing to go and pay for new prescriptions and do all that, right? And the question about digital solutions versus the digital divide, I think is really interesting, because I think it's a question about pace, right? Are we creating digital solutions as fast as we're bridging the digital divide, or are we kind of playing catch up one to another all the time? And I think for people in the room, what does that look like in the communities that you come from and in the countries that you come from? Do you have any solutions for us, right? Is how do you match the pace of digital advancement with digital divide, especially for rural communities. Dumi, so you come from a business background, and I know your focus is on SMEs. So can you maybe tell us about your key learnings and challenges and what success look like on your side?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam President, Program Director. Sorry, it's late in the day. So maybe as a start, just to frame the conversation. So I head up an entity called the Master Citizen Fund. It's a non-profit company housed within the bigger Old Mutual business. And what we do is provide funding and business support to small, medium, and micro entities, with a particular focus on businesses that are owned by women, youth, and people living with disabilities. So I'm hoping the minister is still in the vicinity somewhere here. And I think one of the challenges, or rather the challenges that we saw as a result of the pandemic, were probably less about them being new as such, but more being enhanced and magnified as a result of the pandemic. And what I mean by that is that, for example, we know the youth in particular. Um, is really circling the drain in terms of the debt trap. And I like what Levi mentioned, around 35% going towards servicing debt. We saw that come to a head during the pandemic. People lost their jobs today, and they were already joining the poverty line the following day because no saving is taking place. And there are always good reasons for why that is. Uh, but in reality, what then happens is it does not only have adverse impact on the individual at that point in time, it also affects the individual going forward. And how we see that in the SME funding space. You go to a bank, you go to a development funding institution, one of the things they want to do as part of screening your application is to look at your credit record. And because of that 3 month, 4 months period you were unemployed, you are now a bad credit. And that's where the buck stops. And it's obviously very frustrating because I didn't have a job due to reasons outside my control. Why am I being punished for it? And another dynamic that closely attaches itself to that is this question, or is this issue of financial education and financial literacy. We live in a country where we pride ourselves in being part of a generation that is a lot more literate than the generation before us. But even then, we are educated, but we are not financially educated. It's tax season in South Africa. Just ask yourself how many people can actually do their own tax returns. If you can't do your own tax return, what happens when you run a business? Because again, if you are in the red with a revenue collector, you're not going to be able to bid for any business that the government issues, because if you're not paying taxes, why should the government give you business? Similarly, from a private perspective, if you don't have a tax clearance certificate, you don't qualify to be funded because you're going to fail the KYC and FICA checks that businesses run. So all these things seem disparate, but they actually tie together and they make it that much more difficult for the youth to access funding. So I'm going to make an opinion that is probably controversial and go off on a limb and say the biggest challenge that the youth in SA faces insofar as running and starting businesses is not so much around funding availability as it is around funding readiness. You want funding, there are people who want to fund you, but you can't be funded. Why? That is the challenge we are seeing in the SME space. It got exacerbated during the pandemic. So that's just one example. But I think the one other thing that one always needs to bear in mind around the youth is organization. So I grew up in a township less than 15 k's from here in Nanda. Those of you know it. And when I grew up, there were youth organizations doing things like dancing, things like music. I don't know what the youth of today are doing, but I can tell you there is no organization around starting businesses. The right people are in the room here today. It's very easy to say to somebody, I'm from this area. This is what we're trying to do as a youth. Please come talk to us. It's It's a very different proposition for you saying, I live in London, please come see me tomorrow. It's not worth it. Incidentally, I was at an event in East London last night. And one of the challenges I got was, we have never seen Massachusetts funded PE, but you are in East London. Why? I said, well, the people of East London organized and invited me. You haven't. Get me 20, 30 business people, young people in the room. I will personally fly down to PE and talk to you. So that's another thing. That's a nugget I would like for the youth to take away today. You need to own and drive the conversation around your own development. The support is there, but you don't always know about. And that's my final point around information asymmetry. The help is there, people don't know about it. So how are we going to make sure going forward that the people that the kind of help that the organizations represented here and across the room want to provide are known about? Nobody is going to help you unless you come to them and tell them the kind of help that you want. Hopefully I didn't drift off topic too much. Thank
No,
you.
I think you were good. I want to follow up with you quickly, for the part of the conversation about what success looks like, right? So you talked about two things. The one was the debt trap that young people are finding themselves in. Can you maybe talk about how does that impact our ability for future planning, right? So I think one of the things that happened during COVID was when people were losing their jobs or had to stay at home without pay, a lot of people were tapping into the UIF and their retirement annuities and all of that, right? And that's meant to be for your future planning, not it's not an emergency fund, right? And so how does our approach to debt and the way it's affected SMMEs affect the way we future plan for young people? But secondly, you talked about funding availability versus funding readiness, right? So in an ideal world, what does a funding ready business look like?
I'll start with your last question. So a funding ready business, as a bare minimum, you already have your financial affairs in order. So your tax clearance is either there or can be very easily obtained. Things basic, like having a business plan. If you don't, knowing the right person to help you put a business plan together. And by the way, there are organizations that can help you craft a business together sometimes for free. But back to my point about information asymmetry, people who need those services don't know about that. And that's a challenge that goes both ways. What are those organizations and businesses doing to create awareness? But equally important, what are the people who are meant to be the recipients of that information doing to obtain that information? So that's the one part. But I mean, I think in terms of what success looks like, uh, financial planning is very important. Living within your means is very important. And as the youth, we don't do that very well. Just go to Instagram, you will see. I often wonder, how do these people afford all these things? And then a person loses their job one day, and tomorrow it becomes very apparent that actually they couldn't afford it all along. So to a certain extent, it's a question about personal discipline, but also appreciating that it does not only affect you today, it actually affects your chances of prosperity. And it's always a challenge as a young person, because you are expected to make decisions about the future that you don't even know, can't contemplate what it's going to look like. And by the time those issues manifest, it's too late for you to go back and fix them. So personal discipline when it comes to personal finances is a solid start. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments at this point before we go to Tlale? Okay, we've got a hand right at the bottom there. Please tell us who you are and where you're from, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes. There's 2 hands down there. Is there a hand this side? Sorry, the pillar is blocking you, so we'll come to the one hand there, and then I'm only going to take these 4. So it's the 2 at the front, and then 1 here, and then I think there's 1 on the side.
Okay. Thank you, Pearl. Hi, everyone. My name is Dudu Nyumbega, and I am part of the Gauteng Youth Advisory Panel. I think for me, mine is essentially just responding to the Ndumiso, right? And keying linking to what you said earlier, Phil, around the digital divide. If we're going to have a conversation around SMEs not getting funding and reaching out to funders, we have especially SMEs in the township, NPOs and NPCs, an issue of compliance. Okay? NPOs and NPCs are struggling with compliance. And then we have an issue of the digital divide, which obviously limits SMEs to getting access. I'm from the East End in Germiston. I know a lot of small businesses run by people that don't have access to funding because of the lack of access to digital divide. So if you're going to have a conversation around financial literacy, a conversation about being disciplined, a conversation about access, then let's talk about how to bridge this gap that will allow for small SMEs, small NPOs to get access to funders. And let's also, whilst we're talking about the sustainable development goals and post COVID, a lot of small businesses and a lot of NPOs had to close shop because funders are suddenly changing their focus areas and funding and focusing on SDGs. How do we capacitate NPOs and NPCs run by the youth to align with the sustainable development goals? And that not let this not be a high level conversation, but be a grassroots conversation that we have with NPOs. And this is a responsibility of institutions such as the DSD. Let's look at how many NPOs that are non-compliant, not because of lack of trying to be compliant, but because they don't know where. We have different types of NPOs in the country. You're either an NPC or an NPO, and different levels of compliance. So we need to address that if we're going to have a conversation around post-recovery, recovery post-COVID, as well as sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you so much. My name is Lieutenant Mafunda. I serve in the Gauteng Youth Advisory Panel. So I come from Gauteng. My question, Butendo Miso, it's or my input as per se, issue of investing in entrepreneurship. It's very important because the entrepreneurs, they become the key drivers for job creation. But it still goes back to an issue of skills development. If you look at our curriculum, it's not in line with what the job demand requires. Because if, for instance, we'll invest much more in entrepreneurial development, this information will be shared to majority of the young people so that them having access to information, they'll be able to comply. But the challenge is in information. I think in advice and what we need to do also as well as the summit, we need to resolve on having the information desk from the local level. Because now when the information is there, it becomes a problem because you'll only get information at a national level. And people that are on the ground are not getting that particular information. So now we all know that it's a constitutional right to have information, but that right, it's not then executed. So our people must be able to have information because them having information, they will be able to also comply because them not complying is just an issue of information also as well. Then on issues of health that Mr. Levy also spoke about, it's a very serious matter because if we will also zoom in terms of the media, in terms of the mental and also physical health awarenesses, as we also spoke about. If you look into in terms of the media, the only thing that is promoted is an issue of alcohol and all those particular things. I think we need to also find ways of getting more at times in terms of promoting the mental and also the physical health, so that even our people, it then becomes a norm to then understand. Hence now, when we had the COVID-19, as we have just said, people are making joke about vaccine and all those sort of things due to a religious background also as well. Others that they didn't believe in using the vaccine and so forth. So we need to also invest more in terms of that. Thank you.
Thanks. So we've got the one hand here. There was the one behind the pillar, and then last one on the side.
All right, I guess yeah, there we go. Good afternoon. My name is Ndumiso Hadebe. I also serve with colleagues at the Gauteng Youth Advisory Panel. which is located in the Office of the Premier, and our work is focused on accelerating the implementation of what is referred to as the Youth Integrated Development Strategy in South Africa. I think perhaps when we are looking at this specific question in terms of socioeconomic recovery in a post-COVID environment, one of the questions that comes as young people, given that COVID was an unanticipated event, as to what can we proactively, leveraging strategic foresight that we are leveraging from the summit, look at the fundamental shifts of the challenges that our communities are faced with, I think, as you said, Pearl, earlier. And when thinking about what are some of the fundamental challenges that our communities and young people across the BRICS countries continue to face, some of them are related to questions of water, and some of them are related to questions of food security. And I think data points that then problematize those specific issues that I think we would need to, at some level, resolve on at this year's summit is when you are thrown with a data point around 2/3 of the world's population are likely to be faced by water scarcity in different parts of the world. What is in the positions of BRICS nations leveraging multilateralism to respond to those specific questions, leveraging issues of digital divide, sustainable climate finance, and so on and so forth? When we're talking about food security, various data estimates talk about the reduction in crop yields, but yet the demand is expected to increase. What is then the positioning of BRICS youth nations in terms of mitigating at a strategic level those specific issues, and how do we leverage multilateralism in responding to those issues before we're then shocked by another shock such as COVID-19? I would like to certainly hear the perspective from delegates and of course panel members. Thank you.
Thank you. Second last person.
Hello, my name is Ngosnatis Bia from the South African Youth Council in KwaZulu-Natal. But my major concern in most of the discussions that are taking place here is us trying to single out South Africa from the BRICS bloc. Why I'm saying this is because us forming part of the BRICS bloc was a certain aim that we need to learn certain things, or they need to learn certain things from us. And one of the critical things that we're failing to discuss as South Africans is the fact that we are having a problem of a system in place in this country. And should we intend to resolve many of the challenges that we are facing, we need to first be direct and deal with those matters. It can't be correct that when we want to emulate whatever China is doing and is progressing in terms of its own economy and whatnot, equally so with Russia and others. But we neglect the reality that there are lessons that we can learn from them. Yet we continue going to the West to find lessons from them. If we are honest about the economy of this country and the transformation of the economy, let us run away from the West and devise our own strategy that will respond to the needs and the challenges that are faced by South African people. It can't be correct that all the time, when, for an example, I think throughout the study, you will find that China, there was a time when they had to transform its own economy. But whenever they were offered solutions from the Washington and whatnot, they said, we don't want those ideas. We have Chinese people who are going to implement its own resolutions and solutions that respond to our own problems, because we understand our own problems. But us as South Africans and Africans in particular, we always want to emulate what is done by China, Russia, and whatnot. We praise them. But whenever we have to source information, we go back to the West. Let us find solutions that will respond to the challenges of African through the ideas that emanate from African people. Thank you.
Thank you. BRICS solutions for BRICS problems.
Thank you so much, and that's also thank you so much for your kind words. BRICS solutions for BRICS questions, BRICS challenges, and jointly we can solve these problems, I think, in the near future. I have a question concerning the youth entrepreneurship, because some of my students are actually after graduation are trying to start their own business in China, and we talked about the foundings and the financial support for these young entrepreneurs in terms of direct investment. But there's another kind of financial support, which is like a tax reduction. You can. It is a common practice in China that if young people start a firm in fields of high technology, the taxation will be reducted like in the first 5 years or 10 years. I cannot remember that clearly, but this is a very functioning mechanism. My question is, how is the situation in Africa, and how are your views concerning this point? Because there are some critics that if we do this, we might promote or enhance the competitiveness of youth entrepreneurship in short term, but in the long term, it's actually a negative impact, because if the taxation favorite is cancelled, these young entrepreneurships may not be further so competitive as they used to be. So I'd like to have your listen to your views on this subject. Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you. You've got a lot to answer. I'm going to give you some time to reflect and ponder all of the questions that have been thrown at you. I'm going to bring in Tlali, who's going to come in with an agri perspective. There were a few comments also made about agribusiness as well. So if you want to respond to them, you can also do that.
Thank you, Pearl. Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we're very lively for the graveyard shift. I'm hoping for more engagement. My name is Salim Mateke, and I'm a consultant in the agricultural space, but I'd like to pitch myself as a solutions finder, a convener of opportunities and sustainability, as well as a fixer. Most recently, I've been doing some very interesting work for the NYDA, where we've been diagnosing, distressed projects in the agricultural space. That's put on other work that I've been doing around climate sustainability, climate change adaptation, not so much mitigation, because we know that in the agricultural sector, what's important is adaptation. Now, just to reflect on the initial question, what are the challenges that COVID-19 exposed? We know that inequality and the severity of inequality in South Africa and other BRICS nations, obviously it looks different, has been a perennial challenge. And so even when the Millennium Development Goals were established, one of the aspects that they did not consider was the issue of inclusivity. And so what ended up happening is that we saw a slight reduction in poverty rates, but inequality shot up. And as a result, we then reframed those Millennium Development Goals into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And they were supposed to be the framework for an equitable world, one that brought in harnessed inclusivity among developed and developing nations, and made it possible for us to share resources, pool resources, and come together in order for us to address some of the socioeconomic outcomes that were pitched. Now, the issue is that when the pandemic now came in, it exposed the extent to which we did not focus on resilience at a national level, right through to grassroots level. And we can see that in agriculture. The pandemic exposed the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of our ecosystems and our ability, and particularly the ability of farming households for them to really respond to shocks, absorb future shocks, absorb current shocks, but also prepare themselves for future shocks. And so what we saw happening there is that what the United Nations had said was that the pandemic reversed 6 years worth of progress that was made in the attainment of the SDGs. But we also know that countries were already lagging behind before the pandemic hit. So this then stands to reason that if we're going to be looking at reframing and building back better, that cannot be for us to get to the point where we are just returning to the pre-COVID developmental ambitions that we had. The objective and the learning here is we've got to find ways to reframe the sustainability agenda such that it reflects not just equality, equity, and inclusivity, but environmental sustainability as well as resilience, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to build back and to ensure that we're able to support our households, support our institutions, and support our national governments in them making the right decisions and the decisions that make it requisite for us to participate better. So coming back down to the opportunity, the most efficient way for us to leverage opportunities coming out of COVID appears to be technology. In the cultural space, that is really vast. There's so many different types of opportunities that we've been seeing And the one that I would like to just start off with, based on what Ndumisa's question is about finance, was about the fact that we've got data-driven lending. Why are we not mobilizing ourselves around opportunities like that, that make it possible for us to lend, possible for farmers to still access opportunities, even without a balance sheet? You know, that becomes an important consideration for us as we move forward and as we're looking at ways for us to create technologies which support not only environmental sustainability, but to make that business. You know, good business is reflected in sustainability, ability to absorb the resilience or to promote resilience while also absorbing climatic shocks. One of the other things that I'd just like to reflect on as well is a strategy that we've seen working and that has great potential across BRICS nations. In the northwest region of China, there's a project called the Luz Plateau. And that is one of the great examples of how it's possible for you to move from land degradation and communities which have to migrate in order for them to function in periods of drought, to actually setting up ecosystems that are feeding the people, allowing the people to feed themselves specifically, allowing them to tap into the natural resources and not be hamstrung by issues around loss of biodiversity, deforestation, and some of the other perennial challenges that we see as the impact of climate change intensifies. So a key strategy in us moving forward and you know, attaining the SDGs has got to be around sustainability-led agricultural growth. And what does that mean? We're talking about a kind of system that accelerates agricultural development through looking at opportunities around financing, which make opportunities more sustainable, which make them more resilient, which make them able to position themselves for future shocks. Countries appear to be enjoying and embracing opportunities around sustainable development, and particularly looking at agricultural growth. But what we're also seeing is that the macroeconomic indicators show us that agricultural sectors, which are more resilient on the continent specifically, were able to outperform their economies in 2020. That tells us that there is a very strong correlation, and the academics can go run the figures. There's a very strong correlation between ecosystems that are more resilient, ecosystems that are more responsive to the needs on the ground, as well as the contributions to the economy. At lower levels of income, or at lower income levels rather, we're seeing that agricultural development contributes to poverty alleviation, specifically regarding SDG 1, which is zero poverty, and also issues around nutritional security, and not just food security, because we know that South Africa has quite a large, a large population of young people who are nutritionally stunted because they're not getting, the right nutrition. It's really just about staple foods, and that's because of an access problem. Back to the inequality that I was referring to. So there is a major imperative for us to look at ways in which we can make our ecosystems responsive to that. Another factor to consider is the World Economic Forum tracks 5 key global risks on an annual basis. And environmental and climate risk is the only risk category that is known to have the highest likelihood and the highest impact, and more importantly, exacerbate all the other categories of risk. We've seen it where, communities are migrating, and we see a lot of geopolitical issues that result from that. We've seen it in technologies that are, unable to land on the ground because of the fact that you have damaged infrastructure in as far as climate is concerned, and others as well. Social is an obvious one. So this means that, and this is the point that I would like to finish off with, it is not possible for us to attain the Sustainable Development Goals in our 2030 agenda if we don't underpin our interventions going forward with resilience and environmental sustainability. We're not going to achieve them. So we have to find ways to catalyze that impact by leveraging technology, and ideally that would mean that we're able to set up mechanisms that are more that allow farming communities and other sectors as well to leverage climate investments, mechanisms that make farming systems more resilient. And what that would look like is on the issue of finance not being a problem, but rather the readiness. Finance always follows function. But what we're seeing in the agricultural space, particularly as far as climate adaptation is concerned, is that there seems to be a lack of availability of climate readiness funds. So what is going into the development of proposals and concepts that can be funded, that can attract climate finance, so that we can balance out what we're seeing right now. The ratio between climate mitigation and climate adaptation is really it's imbalanced. And so what we want to see is policies that make it conducive for private investors to come in and for them to really start supporting initiatives that government is mobilizing. And policies obviously need to be responsive to this. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks. Before we come to you, Noktula, I want to ask you a question about resilience and future proofing, right? Because I think by its very nature, the agricultural sector is a resilient one, right? It's constantly having to future proof. So you have to think about what happens if you have a drought this year, what happens if you get a bad yield, right? What happens if I don't know what happens in agriculture. But it's an industry where you constantly have to plan for disaster, right? And I think that's part of the reason why even during COVID, the agricultural sector was still one that was able to do relatively well because it's embedded in the way the industry functions. It's already future proofing, right? What are some of the lessons do you think we can learn from that?
The first thing I'd really like to be clear here is that when you don't have the right compliance or you don't meet the right compliance, even in instances where you would be able to go and tap into disaster risk funding, you would struggle. So the key thing here, and I think it builds on what Ndumiso was saying at Masisane, is that we need to find ways in which we can support the digitalization of record keeping for farmers to make it possible for them to utilize what the opportunities that are available to them in these moments when they have to now, consider disasters. The second thing is the jockey, the individual who is running the operation, the individual who is going to, who's going to be looking for ways in which they can make their business more resilient. Ideally, they would have the right knowledge base, to understand what it is that they need to do in order for them to position themselves for certain disasters. The problem with what happened during COVID was that it wasn't just about it was basically a magnification of the current shocks as well as what can happen if you don't prepare yourself adequately at the moment. Most of the farmers were not even able to tap into some of the disaster risk funds at the DFIs. And so I think the key thing there is we have to find ways to digitalize record keeping, whether it's finding information about the farmers that we can use in more innovative solution opportunities. I mean, insurance opportunities where you have your GPS coordinates that are set up at the farm where you just you use the technology without having to ask a farmer to come in. The interesting examples on the continent where you'd have these input suppliers that would embed a barcode or a QR code in a bag of maize. And once that maize has been planted, it triggers an insurance policy which can be called upon in the event of late rains or pests and diseases that are onset. So if we know that if we have the GPS and the satellite imagery of the area where you're going to be planting this crop, why is it not automatically triggering the right support? And so that creating a digitalized way forward is the only way for us to leverage this.
Such an interesting insight into how you can bring in digital solutions to something that you didn't think can require digital technology. That's really interesting. Says Noktula?
Thank you. Good. Is it still afternoon? Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Noktula Slamlela. Pardon my voice. I just got flu with these changing weather patterns. So I work for Food and Beverage Manufacturing Institute. It's a sector education training authority. We are responsible for facilitating skills development in the sector by providing skills in the sector of manufacturing of food and beverages. We have other seaters. There's about 20 seaters in all, 21 seaters in all, with us being one of them. We facilitate development skills in through different interventions, like learning programs that are out there, leadership skills programs, and others. So that's what we do. To talk about what are the challenges that we have faced post-COVID, I think we can all agree that these have honestly exacerbated by the shocks that happened during the pandemic. And they are not necessarily new. The inequalities of South Africa have always been there. It's just that we are more exposed, especially on the basis of development of skills. Companies have reduced because we were so much in the survival mode. Companies decided instead of spending and investing money in development skills, they would rather spend the money in saving. That is in production and increasing their revenues and increasing their profits. But they forgot that it is quite important to continue enhancing the skills of the people that they work with and also they employed. Most of the people in the room have talked about access to information, lack of information, and a lack of understanding of the requirements, especially when it comes to funding, in terms of compliance. And those challenges obviously will be more if people do not invest in skills. The investment in skills is very important in the sustainability and growth of businesses. Because with lack of skill and knowledge, you will not be able to at least understand the requirements. I'm in the manufacturing business, very stringent rules in terms of compliance to regulation. What I have seen is that a lot of small businesses are challenged when it comes to those requirements. And these challenges then stops them from accessing markets. Everybody talks about there must be opportunities to access to markets and access to funding. We had our colleagues here talking about why people are not funding ready. They're not funding ready because of all the things that you have publicly said, but also because they don't understand or are not skilled. So our responsibility is to provide those skills as citizens. And we actually focus on small businesses because we've seen that there's a big challenge in them understanding the requirements of different sectors. In my sector, you need to be food safety. You need to understand how to handle your food. You need to know the good manufacturing practices. You need to know the um, certificates that are required for you to do business. And without those certificates, you can't get into different markets. So you would end up relying on the communities in terms of growing your business. So it's quite important that we develop skills at different levels and also focus on different industries because we can have a genuine new venture creation and for example, or any other type of training. But if we're not specific in terms of industries, then we have challenges. And these challenges are out there because most, even the small businesses, have put aside the training and interventions that we provide to them. They are not putting them as a priority. They are basically saying, you know what, I need to be in the office, I need to be in the business, I need to be in the factory, I need to produce so that I can survive. Then they ignore the fact that they still need some kind of understanding what is what does it take to grow and sustain a business? How do I develop a bankable business plan? How do I comply with all the regulations and requirements that are out there for small businesses? And I'm not talking to small businesses only, but I'm focused on small businesses because I know that medium and large companies have got a lot of skilled people. Also, even small businesses need to invest in upskilling their own employees. They most of the time, because we're pushing profits, we're pushing survival, we do not invest in upskilling our own people. So you've got maybe 5 or 6 people that work for you, or maybe more. Then what you focus on is the business and not the development of skills of those people, so that you can better productive. So that's quite important, and we've seen those as challenges in our sector. Now, if I come up to talk about opportunities, with the changing world of work, we have seen that it is quite important to upskill and reskill people. We have seen people losing their jobs, and we have a lot of people with skills that are out there that can help mentors, that can help coaches. So there are opportunities for that to pair those people with small businesses so that they can assist them with their business growth. We need to also think about how, I mean, we're talking about digital transformation, digital divide. We cannot anymore think about the classroom skilling because time is not there. People don't have time to leave their businesses and so we do need to adapt new ways of training through the digital platforms or through hybrid system. Only challenge in Africa that we have, or the major challenge, is obvious access to infrastructure, internet, which is what we're talking about. So we need to somehow find a way of dealing with that. I know that the communication department is dealing with access 2030, where they would like to see majority of South Africans in, having access to internet basic requirements, which is internet data and all that, so that they can grow. We have seen also with the energy crisis that's coming through, there are new job opportunities that are coming with regards to renewable energy and just energy transition. Excuse me. And those opportunities come with need to be upskilled. So it's quite important that we upskill our people in all these opportunities that come as a country. How do I picture success as a system? If companies start collaborating with public sector, where we're having more triple Ps, and where we collaborate and put our resources together, we can upskill those who need the skill to do business better. And because most of the time when you talk to companies, they say, why are you not opening your market? Why are you not providing access to your market? They always say they lack the knowledge, they lack the skill. And then we need to collaborate so that we provide the funding that is required to upskill our people according to their requirements, and then they can then open them without having excuses that are so marginally or migraine as for skill. We must also continue to enhance the skills of our people so that they understand the requirements of good food production, quality control requirements, what are the safety regulations. The food industry is very regulated. Small businesses need to really capacitate themselves and invest in upskilling so that they can respect the compliance requirements and the certificates that are required by the industry so that they are able to put their products in in different stores. We also need to provide youth with private placement opportunities. Youth need to get some kind of experience so that they can get the knowledge and the skill that they need to either continue and be absorbed by the industry or open their own businesses. So experience is quite important, especially for those who have graduated. Also, practical experience is very important for learners who have not necessarily graduated but need internship so that they can qualify. So that those opportunities need to be opened up by the markets, opened up by the industries so that they can get these learnings. We also need to invest in apprentices. I mean, everybody needs an electrician, plumber, welder, and all those other technical skills. If we give young people opportunities of apprenticeship and practical experience, that will assist them obtain the trade that they need in terms of artisanal trade, then that will help also assist in alleviating the unemployment that we have in the country. We also need to collaborate with higher education institutions, the industry leaders, so that a curriculum is developed. I think one of the speakers in the audience spoke about a relevant curriculum development, so that industry and the sector and youth can be trained in relevant and future-looking programs versus things of the past. And
I want to stop you for a second because I want to bring in some of the questions that have been asked earlier, right? But I think it's interesting that you mentioned how when businesses turn a profit, it's profits are used more for survival rather than for upskilling, right? And I think it's an interesting case because in South Africa, most businesses start up because of sustenance, right? Because we need to survive. But I think the stats is like 75% of businesses in South Africa fail within the first 2 years. And so the idea of skilling is not part of our prioritization as small businesses, right? But I think it feeds into what Levi was saying, and I want to bring you in to address some of the questions from earlier about how we prioritize budgets and resources, right? If we have a Department of Small Businesses in South Africa, for example, money should be going to skilling and upskilling businesses, but we don't know where that money is going, right? And we see throughout government how much unspent budget gets sent back because of incorrect budgeting priorities. So I think it's just an interesting kind of overlap on different issues. Levi, you have a lot of experience doing multilateral work, right? And so I want you to respond to Numiso's question earlier about how do we leverage a room like this, right? We sit here with BRICS countries. We don't often get to sit with each other like this. What opportunity does this room present to us, right? And how can we leverage this idea of multilateralism? And then Jamiso, I want to bring you in immediately after him. We really got caught up in this conversation because we only have 20 minutes left. I don't know where the time went. But I want you to talk a little bit about the question earlier about tax breaks, right? So, and there has been a conversation in the small business community in South Africa, right, about this idea that maybe for the first few years of a young startup's life, that they have relaxed compliance policies and relaxed tax policies, right? What is your thinking around that? Can you respond to that question? And then also the question about NPO and NPC compliance, right? Because I think what was said earlier is the idea that all of this information is available to people. But I think people don't know what they don't know. So even if you have access to the internet, if you don't know what to type in Google, you're not going anywhere, right? And this idea about NPOs as well, right? Because I think especially when we talk about economic growth and recovery, we talk about it within the context of small businesses. We don't talk about it in the context of nonprofit organizations and nonprofit companies, right? So where's the space for them in this conversation, also as drivers of employment? So yeah, if you could respond to those two questions, and then Levi, if you could come in first on that multilateralism question. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Not a loaded question at all, right? Um, Great comment. I really echo your comment, and I think the soundbite coming away from that is BRIC solutions to BRIC problems. I think take a forward-looking view of this. I'd say let's focus on what's coming up so that we can troubleshoot almost all the plane and fly it into the next couple of months. So we know that in September there will be the SDG summit. We find ourselves at the halfway point between 2030. And I think that there is an interesting window of political opportunity to really see how G77 countries, the G20, and BRICS, most importantly, really coalesce around some of the progressive development agendas that we want to see highlighted in the SDG summit. And the reason as to why I mentioned the SDG summit is because in 2024 we will see the summit of the future. And I was telling Paul and other colleagues as we were preparing for this panel, the Summit of the Future is shaping up to be a Rio 20 plus moment. So in 2012, the Rio conference had happened, and the Rio conference basically decided the bare bones of the post-2015 agenda, which then became Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I think we have a unique window of political opportunity to start making some really progressive arguments around youth development and empowerment, but we've got to start early. In 2014, I think as an international youth community, we started to make arguments around a youth goal to be integrated in the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals. We failed because we started too late. But We can learn lessons from the climate movement. We can learn lessons from the women's movement, who all started prior to 2012 and managed to land respective goals on gender equality and on climate in the SDG framework. So the SDG Summit is a great place to start. Secondly, from a health and well-being perspective, this year sees 3 global meetings on health. There's a high-level meeting on universal health coverage, there's a high-level meeting on tuberculosis, and there's a high-level meeting on pandemic preparedness and response. I think that we have a unique moment of opportunity to really look at universal health coverage as a concept. Most of our countries in the BRICS bloc are looking at national health insurance schemes, or already have secured national health insurance schemes. But I think it's about interrogating the positionality of to what extent adolescents and young people are covered within those minimum package of services that are taxpayer funded as part of those NHIs. So we should really look at how far member states have gone since the first high-level meeting on UHC in 2019 in terms of ensuring access to services for adolescents and young people within the NHI schemes. And then the third and the fourth one, I've spoken about the fourth one already, the Summit of the Future, but I think the third one is also of most importance as it comes up in October. The United Nations is convening for the first time a global forum on adolescence, and it is incredibly important considering that Brazil, India, and South Africa have amongst the largest adolescent populations globally. And I think this really does align both to the SDG Summit and Summit of the Future in terms of creating and curating progressive agendas within the multilateral space in terms of youth development and youth empowerment more broadly. And again, the Summit of the Future next year, September 2024, will really set the bare bones of what will become the 2030 agenda. So as much as we are focusing on the next 6 to 7 months between now and 2030, we almost have to think beyond 2030 in terms of what we want to win in the political agenda that comes after 2030, because it will really influence the flow of resources, it will influence political agendas, it will influence donor priorities, and if we don't manage to get some progressive youth insights in there, we've ultimately lost the battle for the future. Thanks.
So, Program Director, how you know you talk too much is when all the hard questions are directed at you. And I think that's where I found myself now. So I'll start with the text question. I think it's a great idea, but I personally have a love-hate relationship with text, and that is because it happens right at the end. So for you to get the tax benefit, you must first start a successful business, run a successful business, make profit. Only then do you get the benefit of tax breaks. In terms of how it's been done in this country, I am aware of a few tax incentives. Are they directly related to the youth? Not necessarily. But again, to our earlier discussion around information asymmetry, how many of the people that need to know about those incentives actually know about them? So I leave it there in terms of the text discussion before I get all nerdy very late in the afternoon. And then the other issue was around compliance and NPO. I believe it was from the lady from the East End. There she is. So I could feel the passion coming out, which always encourages me. And to those who don't remember initially, the company I ran is also an NPC, so sister in arms. So the thing about compliance is it's frustrating, it is everywhere, it is complicated, and it costs money to understand and to comply. So when we are in NPO, you are already at a disadvantage, but it's also not going anywhere because if you don't comply, then you can't do all the good work you wanted to do. How do we solve for that? I'm not entirely sure, but here's what I will suggest. Um, let's talk about it. We've met. I will give you my number at the end of this. You invite me and my team. We'll come and talk to you guys in terms of how we can try and make the journey just a little bit more easier. But I will say this, to your point about digitization, we always have to bear in mind that when you talk about South Africa, you are talking about a classic 2080 country. And what I mean by that is that you have a country where 20% is so prosperous and have access to everything, the other 80% doesn't even know it exists. So when we talk about leveraging digitization in a country like South Africa, you are actually talking about the 20% because the 80% does not have access to digitization. So by the time you talk about taking advantage of it, you're already speaking a foreign language. And that's a real challenge we need to talk about. But more importantly, we need to recognize that what we are talking about here are our problems, take the opportunity to solve. If you are digitized, I will be able to funding business support to you quickly. But if you don't have access to those digital, that's the end of the conversation. But then that's where other parties come in. That's where you bring in your local municipality, your local council, saying in places like Limpopo, they are actually creating digital centers so that even though you don't necessarily have access to internet at home, there's a center you can go to in your community and you can access these things. Why is it not happening in my community? But then again, an individual can ask that question, it's not going to go anywhere. But if a group of people, a group of like-minded individuals are holding their public servants to account and asking the right questions, that's where you see the difference. I'm going to stop there before I generate more questions for myself.
Thank you. I see you trying to escape. We, oh, wow, hectic. I just looked at the time. We have 8 minutes. And so I did promise we would finish before 6, and I would like to stick to that. So to conclude, Tlale and Noktula, can you, in 3 minutes each, give us a call to action in this room, right? So I think we've heard a lot about what solutions look like, right? We've heard a lot about what we would like to see at the end of all of this. And I think a lot of us agree with a lot of the suggestions that have been made, right? We're also all young people in this room who are active in whatever work that we're doing. And I know generally at gatherings like this, we talk a lot about writing papers and influencing policy and doing all of these very big, high level things that never really amount to anything, right? So, for me, as a parting shot in this conversation, what would be 3 practical things that young people in this room can do to contribute towards achieving the solutions that have been set out today? So 1 minute for each thing, please. We really want to meet the 6 o'clock deadline.
So do I. It's my last night in Cape Town, in Durban. Okay, great. So I think the first thing that I just want to emphasize is the fact that even though I'm looking at the agricultural sector, everybody has an opportunity to contribute. There are other sectors that obviously complement agriculture, and I was reflecting with the other speakers about an opportunity that was leveraged by 2 young women from Free State. Their company is called Ramzilo Construction, and what they've done is that they were the first company in South Africa to bring the eco-brick technology to the country. And so what they're doing there is they're taking single-use problematic plastics, which typically would not be recycled and would end up in landfill, and they're creating these eco-bricks that are more porous than cement bricks, that are more durable, and they're fire retardant, meaning that you're able to produce a more affordable brick and one which is going to sell at a time. So even though they've decided to leverage SDG 9, which is industry innovation and infrastructure, they've now, by virtue of doing that, unlocked progress in 8 other SDGs because they're working with the communities to enable job creation, to enable the community to start generating their own incomes, which then allows them to address their nutrition needs, but also to send their children to school. And that now then leads to the women in the family being able to explore diverse opportunities for employment. So that's the first thing. Regardless of which industry that you happen to be in, opportunities, look at them holistically and ensure that you're mapping out how you can create these linkages between the SDGs. The second point has to do with I think this is a high level one, which is the issue of trade advancement. Between the BRICS countries, we are importing, or our food import bill is 241 billion. And this is all money that ends up flowing out of our nations because of the fact that we are not competitive internally in terms of intra-regional trade and moving goods across. These are basic foods: beef, wheat, berries, apricots. So these are goods that should be able to flow within our block, but that is going to require us looking at trade considerations like facilitating B2B exchanges, which I think has been done to a great extent, but also trade facilitation as far as removing non-tariff barriers. How do you ensure that you can create preferential tariffs? How do we lower the tariffs that are there among the different states? And obviously, this is all very political. It's political in nature because there are existing trade agreements in place. But the important thing is we increase the competitiveness amongst ourselves, so trade is more attractive. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks. Excuse me. I know I stand between you and going home, so I'll be very, very quick. So I will still emphasize on that youth need to upskill themselves. Take opportunities that are available out there to be trained and educated, and also partner ourselves with mentors who understand have expertise in the different sectors. So it's quite important that we do invest in upskilling our youth, upskilling them so that they can grow in sustainable businesses. Also, we need to encourage our youth to get involved in sectors like tourism, agriculture, because those you can at least be able to employ more people. So it's quite important that we think about those other industries. Also, we need to just create and stop these barriers to entry that have been created and continue to provide funds for innovative programs that youth are coming with. So it's quite important that we fund different programs that we alleviate unemployment and poverty in the country. We've got very innovative youth in this country. We've got a very young nation. So if we help them and capacitate them with different skills, provide them with funding, stop and help with ease of doing business. And then they'll be able to also access different types of markets. And again, as I said, we need knowledge and information to provide this information to our youth to be able to understand what is required in different sectors.
Thank you. I just want to say in closing, thank you for all of the contributions. I wish we could have taken more rounds of hands, but the problem with having a good panel is that you have a good panel and you kind of want to hear what they have to say because, I mean, you asked them to come here. What I will say, because no one else has said this yet, so I'm going to use this for shameless our commission, is that on Thursday morning, we will all break away into all of the commissions that the panels have been themed on. We'll get an opportunity to kind of flesh out all of the conversations we've been having. And so I would encourage you to join our commission. It's obviously going to be the best one. And so we will see you on Thursday. I want to say thank you to the panel for your contributions, and we'll give them all a round of applause as they walk off stage. If you all take a quick moment to look at your cell phones or your technological devices, it is 5:59. Thank you so much. Good night. Okay, for all my sins, I've been asked to close the day. I just want to put on record, we did finish before 6, right? Okay, so for today, I think everyone's got dinner at their respective hotels. Tomorrow, we would like to begin at 9.